The first gun went up, and that was their second mistake. The first was showing up on my property at all. The so-called HOA enforcement team didn't even make it past the gate before my wife dropped the first one to his knees, disarmed, disoriented, and dumb enough to reach again. She didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, clipped, authoritative. "Weapons down, or I will escalate." And that was the moment everything changed. The second man froze, gun trembling. My daughters were screaming behind me. My wife's eyes didn't even blink. They had no idea the woman they just pointed a gun at is a Navy commander with combat clearance. What happens when a neighborhood security clown picks a fight with someone trained to take down terrorists? Have you ever watched someone mistake a homeowner for a helpless target and find out too late she runs battlefield strategy for a living? We moved in thinking we'd finally found stillness. After 16 years of duty stations, on-base housing, and temporary billets that never felt like home, we wanted roots. My wife, Natalie, a Navy commander with 2 decades of service and a chest full of ribbons she never brags about, had just finished her final deployment overseas. She was done jumping time zones and breathing recycled air in steel coffins underwater, and I was ready to give my daughters a backyard that didn't come with a perimeter fence and a patrol schedule. So we bought the house. Big enough for peace, small enough to keep close. The neighborhood was called Maplestone Meadows. Of course it was, sounding more like a yoga retreat than a community under constant surveillance. The realtor had praised the HOA like it was a selling point. They keep everything safe, clean, orderly. It's what makes the property value here stable. What she didn't say was that it wasn't safety they enforced. It was submission. The moment we unpacked the last box, the letters started. First, it was the wind chimes on the back porch. Too auditory disruptive, they said. Then, it was the tires of Natalie's car touching the edge of the curb by less than 4 inches, a violation of Section 14.2. Then came the mulch warning. Apparently, the color, deep bark brown, was outside the HOA's approved palette of desert blend tones. I laughed the first time. Natalie didn't. "They're testing boundaries," she said, sipping coffee while scanning a digital map of the community on her tablet. "You give people power without training, they play soldier, until they meet someone who knows what a real uniform feels like." I told her to let it go. We were homeowners now, not combatants. But my wife, the same woman who trained warfighters in asymmetric environments, didn't ignore patterns. She studied them. It escalated fast. We received a warning because our kids had chalked on the driveway simple hopscotch lines. Apparently, colored sidewalk chalk compromised the uniform aesthetic. We shrugged it off until the security guy showed up. Not a cop, not even a real rent-a-cop. Just some guy in a tight black polo with HOA security embroidered on the chest like it meant something. He didn't knock. He waited outside our fence with a camera and took photos. I only saw him because I went to refill the dog's water bowl. At first, I thought he was lost. Then I saw him tilt the lens directly toward the backyard, where our daughters were playing under the shade canopy. Natalie was inside, cleaning out the utility room. I walked straight out to him, calm, measured. "You need something?" I asked, stepping between him and the fence line. He smiled without blinking. "Documenting a compliance check." His badge was plastic, the kind you order in bulk online. "On whose authority?" I said. He tapped a clipboard, then gestured toward the HOA community office at the end of the cul-de-sac. "President Reynolds has authorized all security to conduct documentation rounds. It's in the community handbook." "That doesn't include photographing children," I replied. His smile didn't budge. "We're concerned about unapproved play structures. Safety is paramount." I didn't say a word. I just held my ground until he left. Natalie was standing behind the screen door by then, silent, eyes locked on him like she'd already evaluated every possible weapon he might be carrying. She didn't speak until he was gone. "That was a probe," she said, "not a check." The next day, we got another citation, this one for visual clutter, because our daughters had left a scooter parked near the porch. The fine was $125. No warning, no courtesy. Just a mailed envelope, hand-delivered, with a photo of our own porch attached. Natalie started tracking everything. Every citation, every visit, every patrol route. She used her classified grade planning software, something she'd once used to help coordinate search and rescue operations in Southeast Asia, and started building a timeline. A pattern emerged. The citations were never about actual violations. They came in waves, always following one of two things. Either we'd been seen speaking to other neighbors, or Natalie had been spotted working out in the yard, in her old Navy PT gear, the bold commander patch still stitched above her heart. They weren't enforcing rules, they were marking targets. The next sign came in the form of whispers. Our neighbors, kind ones, quiet ones, stopped waving. A couple even crossed the street when walking their dogs. I caught wind of a post in the community Facebook group we hadn't even been invited to join. It accused Natalie of intimidating conduct and militarized behavior during routine neighborhood operations. She hadn't even spoken to anyone. But someone didn't like the way she looked standing tall beside the flagpole we'd installed legally. It was regulation height, anchored properly, with lighting for night display. But the flag, the American flag, was deemed politically charged by Karen Reynolds, HOA president and reigning suburban dictator. She called a board meeting to discuss it. We were not invited. But we showed up anyway, Natalie in jeans and a gray sweater, calm as ever, me in boots still dusted with the day's work. The meeting was in the community center, white walls, plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting humming like a lie. Karen stood at the front with her manicured nails and rehearsed authority. "We're here to maintain order," she said, "to preserve harmony." Natalie asked one question. How is photographing children without parental consent harmony? Karen blinked once, like a lizard on a rock. Then she moved on without answering. We were escorted out by the same security officer from earlier. I told him to keep his hands off my wife. He didn't try, but he smiled anyway. That night, Natalie checked the door locks twice, installed a secondary camera in the backyard. Said nothing. Just moved with that quiet edge I'd learned to fear more than yelling. Something in her had shifted. The part of her that once stood on a deck with a headset and called in extraction under live fire, she was back. And she didn't need orders this time. A week later, our mailbox was opened. Tampered with. We couldn't prove it, but we found 2 opened envelopes left inside. One was a bill. The other, a military pension statement. "They're fishing," Natalie said, "trying to confirm what kind of leverage they have." That's when she told me the worst part. This isn't just an HOA problem. This is a control operation run by someone who believes fear equals order. She showed me the map, the timeline, the trends. They weren't targeting everyone equally. Only the strong ones. Only the ones who wouldn't fall in line. I told her I was ready to leave. She looked at me like I'd forgotten who she was. "No," she said. "We don't run. We hold the line." That's when I realized Natalie hadn't unpacked just our furniture. She'd unpacked her mindset. She wasn't just settling into the neighborhood. She was preparing to reclaim it. And war, real war, was something Karen Reynolds had never been trained for. But we had. It started with the tires. Again. One night, a faint rumble passed by our house around 2:13 a.m. Not the slow cruise of someone heading home, but the deliberate roll of a vehicle meant to be seen and heard. I didn't think much of it until the second night, when it happened again. Same time, same vehicle, black SUV, no plates. Just a spotlight that flicked on for a few seconds, sweeping across our front lawn, pausing a beat too long on our girl's bedroom window before moving on. Natalie watched the third night from behind the curtain, silent, barefoot, her arms crossed tight like a loaded spring. I didn't say anything. I knew she was already counting license plate bolts, tire patterns, time intervals. The fourth night, the vehicle stopped altogether. The driver didn't get out, just parked across the street, engine idling, lights off. Natalie was already at the kitchen table, gear spread out. Not weapons. Not yet. Just surveillance tech. She didn't need to ask for permission. She never did. By the time I poured the coffee, she'd installed 2 motion-activated cameras and cross-synced them to a private server she controlled from her phone. "This isn't bluffing anymore," she said, scrolling through thermal calibration options. "This is probing, and it's turning into a full-spectrum pressure op." I didn't have to ask if she'd seen this kind of thing before. We both had, just never on American soil, and never from people who claimed to be protecting a neighborhood. That same morning, we found a notice nailed to our front door. Not taped, nailed. A fat roofing nail, driven straight through the wood like a threat from an old western. The paper was a violation slip for unauthorized water usage and visible roof clutter. The first made no sense. We'd installed a high-efficiency drip system. The second? Natalie's training ruck, which had been air drying after she cleaned it. That was apparently now a threat to the community's visual harmony. She didn't laugh. She took the paper, scanned it, and logged the timestamp. Then she began the calls. Not to lawyers. Not yet. She reached out to her people, the ones who owed her favors. The ones who didn't appear in Facebook groups or community bulletins. They were in a different sort of neighborhood. One with airstrips in forgotten deserts and languages you don't admit you speak. That afternoon I came home early and found Natalie in the backyard, crouched behind the shrub line near the fence. I almost didn't recognize her. Hair tied back, stance low, one hand braced on the soil. There was someone on the other side of the fence. A man. Squat. Bald. Holding what looked like a small drone controller. His back was to me, but I caught a glimpse of the words on his jacket. Property Enforcement Team. Not a real agency, not even a licensed security firm. Just another HOA toy with too much authority and not enough sense. Natalie stood slowly, no sound. Her voice was low, clear, and deliberate. "State your purpose." The man flinched, then turned slowly with a grin that didn't belong on a human face. "Community compliance," he said, raising the controller. "We received a report of suspicious items near the perimeter. HOA authority extends to suspicious property zones." Natalie didn't blink. "That's not law, that's trespassing," he smirked. "We'll let the board decide." Then he walked off, back stiff with fake confidence. Natalie waited until he turned the corner before moving again. She walked into the house, didn't speak, just grabbed her tablet and started building something I couldn't quite name. An operational log, a threat assessment model, layers of incident documentation that wouldn't just hold up in court. They'd hold up at the Pentagon. That night, I walked out to the mailbox just after dinner and saw the same SUV parked down the street. No movement, just presence. I walked to it. No hesitation, no plan, just anger. But before I got close, it peeled away, quietly, smoothly, deliberately. I didn't say a word when I walked back inside. Natalie had seen it from the kitchen. She didn't need me to explain. The next morning, it arrived. The envelope that detonated everything. Not a citation. Not a warning. A final eviction notice printed on heavy cardstock with the HOA seal stamped in red across the header. It was hand-delivered by two men who stood 6 feet apart, arms crossed, mirrored sunglasses reflecting our porch. They looked like private military contractors, but cheaper, sloppier, and pretending harder. One held the envelope. The other kept his hand near his hip where a nylon holster was poorly concealed under his jacket. Natalie opened the door before I could. She didn't flinch. "You are trespassing on private property," she said. The taller one spoke. "Ma'am, your property is now in non-compliance escalation. This is your final relocation notice before enforcement." I stepped beside her. "We're paid up. We violated nothing legal. You're bluffing." The man didn't even look at me. "Orders are from President Reynolds. You've been deemed disruptive to community operations. You have 48 hours to vacate or face corrective compliance action." Natalie stepped forward then. Not fast, not aggressive, just one step. "You're about 3 seconds from a federal felony," she said quietly. "You just delivered an eviction notice to a decorated officer's residence under false authority while armed with no court order. That's impersonating enforcement, unlawful threat of force, and attempted coercion on federal pensioned land. You want to test what jurisdiction means, gentlemen?" Silence. Then the shorter one pulled out a phone and snapped a picture of our address plate. Natalie took a photo of them in return. Her expression was unreadable. They left without another word. That night, she didn't sleep. I heard the sound of typing, rapid, rhythmic, relentless. When I finally got up around 2 a.m., she was at the kitchen table, 3 screens open, satellite view on one, HOA filings on the second, a facial recognition program on the third. 2 of them used to work for a defunct private security firm out of New Mexico, she said without looking up. Lost their licenses 3 years ago. Reynolds contracted them through an LLC she formed after her husband got indicted for wire fraud. They're laundering authority through shell corporations. And the HOA lets her? I asked. Natalie shook her head. She is the HOA. I didn't know what to say. She did. They picked the wrong house. The next morning, I sent an official notice to the HOA's listed legal contact demanding documentation of any legal basis for eviction. I cited state laws, federal housing statutes, and case precedents. I included video footage from our doorbell camera. I BCC'd 3 reporters I used to know from my work in government procurement. The reply came from Karen Reynolds herself, an email with no greeting, no signature, just one line. We own the law in this zip code. Natalie read it. Then she reached into the storage locker in the garage and pulled out her Navy-issued deployment case. She didn't say a word, but I recognized the way she moved. Deliberate, focused, tactical. She unpacked only what mattered. Documents, credentials, digital logs, not weapons, not yet. But every part of her screamed readiness. That night, she called someone. Didn't say who. Didn't have to. All I heard her say was, "It's happening. I need digital redundancy and 2 pairs of eyes watching the perimeter. Civilian escalation protocol, Tier 2. No noise." Not yet. When she hung up, she looked at me. They want war, she said. Let's show them what that really means. The sun wasn't even up when I pulled into the grocery store parking lot, a routine errand meant to bring back cereal, milk, and a few minutes of peace before the girls woke up. The world still felt quiet at that hour, like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. I didn't know that while I stood under the humming fluorescence of aisle 6 comparing 2 brands of almond milk, a black Ford F-250 with magnetic HOA decals and bulletproof glass windows was crawling toward my front porch. Natalie had been up since 5:00. She always was. Even after retirement, the internal clock of a Navy commander didn't sleep in. She'd already jogged the perimeter, made breakfast, and double-checked the security feeds before the girls came bounding out of their room like cannonballs in pajamas. The morning was peaceful, deceptively so, until the truck pulled into our driveway with the confidence of a military convoy entering a secured compound. Natalie saw it on the monitor first, a grainy feed from the side yard camera. 2 men stepped out, same types as before. Tactical vests, cargo pants, sunglasses despite the dawn light. One of them carried a clipboard. The other carried something far more dangerous, the posture of a man prepared to pull a gun. Natalie moved fast, not panicked, precise. She called out to the girls, short, clipped instructions like a drill. Code blue, grab your bags, upstairs, safe room now. She didn't need to explain. They trained it 3 times. She kept it light, fun even. Pretend drills for if the bad guys from the movies ever came near. But today, the pretend wasn't pretend anymore. The girls disappeared into the hallway, disappearing into the security room hidden behind the false closet wall, Natalie's design, complete with reinforced doors, emergency supplies, a tablet with full camera access, and a silent alarm rig to ping 2 undisclosed government agencies. Then she moved to the front door. The knock came too late. She already had eyes on them through the peephole and 3 other camera angles. The man with the clipboard stepped up like a salesman with too much confidence and not enough sense. He didn't wait for a response. He tried the doorknob. Natalie had locked it an hour earlier, but that didn't slow them down. The second man, taller and bulkier, moved around to the side as if flanking a target. They weren't just here to intimidate. They were here to enter. Clipboard spoke, loudly, through the door. Ma'am, this is your final HOA enforcement protocol notice. You are ordered to vacate under Article 4C11. We are here to facilitate that process. Natalie didn't answer. She moved like a shadow through the living room, calculating angles, checking the side gate monitor. Bulkier guy was already pushing the latch. That's when Clipboard went for his weapon. It was subtle. He thought he was smooth. Thumb brushed the holster. Hand tensed. Natalie had already moved. She opened the front door just wide enough to speak. "Leave the property now." Clipboard didn't budge. "We have legal authority. This structure is under neighborhood non-compliance seizure." He reached into his jacket. She didn't wait. The moment she saw the black polymer grip peek from the holster, she acted. One hand on the edge of the door, the other reached forward, lightning fast, grabbed his arm, twisted it sideways in a bone-bending wrist lock, and yanked him into the threshold. He stumbled, off balance. She stepped back, turned her body, slammed the door shut against his torso, pinning him halfway in, half out. He howled. His weapon clattered to the floor. She kicked it under the console table without a word. The second man was already coming around the side when he heard his partner scream. Natalie was moving before he reached the porch, snatched open the front door, dragging Clipboard fully inside with a maneuver only someone who'd taught close-quarter combat could execute. She dropped him like luggage in the foyer, spun to the porch, and faced the second man who had drawn his weapon fully now, arm extended in what he thought was a practice stance. She didn't blink. "Drop it," she said, voice flat, command level cold. He hesitated. "Now," she repeated. Her posture was relaxed, but every inch of her screamed danger. He'd never seen war, but he had enough animal instinct to recognize what he was facing. His gun dipped slightly. She stepped forward. "You are currently committing armed criminal trespass, endangering minors, impersonating an officer of the law, and brandishing a weapon on private property. If you do not drop that firearm, I will take it from you, and you will not like how that feels." His hands shook. He lowered it to waist height, still hesitant. She saw it in his stance. He wasn't going to comply. He was going to try something. Natalie stepped left. He lunged. He tried to lift the weapon again, but she was already moving. One step. Pivot. Grip. She grabbed the barrel, turned it sideways, twisted his wrist, and brought her knee up into his thigh so hard it buckled. He fell with a grunt, gun flying free. She kicked it into the bushes, then knelt beside him, pressing his face into the gravel with the heel of her boot. Clipboard man was still wheezing on the floor inside. "This is Commander Natalie Walker," she said into her phone, voice steady, almost bored. "Request immediate law enforcement response. I've detained 2 armed individuals posing as HOA enforcement attempting unlawful entry. Address is on file." Then she locked the door. The girls were safe. The threats were neutralized, and she didn't even break a sweat. I got the call as I was loading the car with bags of groceries. My phone buzzed once. Natalie's voice came through in a low whisper. "It's handled. Come home and don't speed. They're both alive." I dropped everything and ran. By the time I got there, the county sheriff was already on scene. 3 cruisers. Lights spinning. Both men cuffed and seated on the curb, faces bloodied and confused. One had a dislocated shoulder. The other kept mumbling something about executive authority. The sheriff pulled me aside. He was a tall man, worn face, more tired than angry. "Your wife's a piece of work," he said. "Took down 2 armed men and secured the scene without even drawing a weapon." I nodded. "She's used to worse," he sighed. "You got problems here, big ones. HOA called claiming you assaulted security officers, but your cameras, they paint a very different picture." Natalie handed him the footage without fanfare. Every angle. Time-stamped, synced, labeled. A prosecutorial dream. He reviewed them on his cruiser laptop, eyes narrowing. "They pulled weapons first. That's felony territory." "And the HOA sent them?" I asked. "We can't confirm that yet. They're claiming volunteer safety consultants. But if those guns weren't registered, and those men weren't licensed, then someone's going to jail." Karen Reynolds showed up half an hour later in a black Audi, dressed like a corporate executive cosplaying as royalty. She marched across the lawn like she still believed the story was going her way. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, waving a manila folder. "We had to escalate compliance enforcement. These homeowners are dangerous. Look at her. She's clearly military, trained, capable of violence. You can't just let people like that live among civilians unchecked. The sheriff stared at her like she'd grown a third eye. "Ma'am," he said, "you just described half the county. Natalie didn't move." She stood beside him, calm, arms folded. Karen pushed harder. "She assaulted 2 of our team members." "Your team members," the sheriff interrupted, "entered private property, drew weapons, and got their asses handed to them by a mom making pancakes for her kids. I've got camera footage, ballistic evidence, and a credible witness who teaches at the War College in Annapolis. You're lucky she didn't do worse." Karen's mouth flapped open, then closed. She turned to me instead. "You've made a mistake going this far. You think this ends in a driveway? This ends in court, in zoning boards, in assessments, in buried paperwork you won't see coming." I smiled at her. "Good, we'll meet you there. Just remember, courtrooms come with discovery." She paled slightly. Natalie didn't even look at her. "You brought weapons to a mom's house," she said quietly. "Don't expect forgiveness, expect evidence." The sheriff arrested both men on the spot. One for brandishing, the other for attempted forced entry and impersonating an officer. As the cuffs clicked, Karen turned and walked away, fast, unsteady. The illusion of power cracking like cheap glass under weight she was never built to carry. That night, Natalie sat on the porch with the girls, playing cards under the soft glow of the hanging lights. I brought her a glass of wine. She smiled but didn't speak for a long while. When she did, it was barely a whisper. "They thought they could walk through that door." I nodded. "And now they know better." "Not just them," she said. "Everyone." I looked at her then, calm, quiet, deadly. Not angry, not proud, just finished. She had trained warriors in sandstorms, cleared buildings with nothing but instinct and breath, and buried men who called her sister in arms. And now she had defended her children, her home, with the same unwavering precision. The line had been crossed, and now it was carved into stone. By sunrise the next day, the war had shifted fronts. No more door knocks, no more tactical amateurs in vests playing war games. Now it was emails, statements, headlines. Karen and her board didn't waste a second. They knew they'd lost the battle in our driveway, so they pivoted to the battlefield they thought they could still control: public perception. It started with a newsletter, distributed digitally to every resident in Maplestone Meadows. Subject line: "Urgent incident involving non-compliant homeowners." No names, just loaded language. An altercation occurred involving trained military personnel and HOA-appointed safety officers. Our team was injured during a routine community safety verification. We regret the escalation and are working with legal counsel to ensure continued harmony and lawful conduct in our neighborhood. Harmony. That word again. They wielded it like a weapon. Clean, bloodless, false. Within hours, the whispers began. Natalie saw the local Facebook groups lighting up, posts from neighbors we'd never even spoken to. "I heard she's some kind of combat specialist. If she's trained like that, is it safe for kids to live nearby? Why would someone like that need to be so aggressive?" By noon, the HOA's legal team had emailed us a cease and desist. The language was veiled but vicious. They accused us of hostile behavior, excessive force, and misrepresentation of threat level. They demanded we refrain from speaking about the incident. Further dissemination of partial footage or inflammatory narrative may result in civil action. Natalie read it once, then deleted it. "They're trying to erase the context," she said. "They want to tell the story without the part where 2 armed men stormed a home with children in it." I nodded, but she was already 10 steps ahead. She didn't just see a legal threat. She saw the structure of a campaign, disinformation, projection, procedural drowning. She'd seen this exact tactic play out in war zones and bureaucracies on every continent. "They're going for saturation," she said. "If they flood the community with noise, it won't matter what's true, only what's repeated." I asked what we do. She just said, "We counter." That night, our dining table became a war room. I pulled out the laptop, She pulled out her credentials. Commander Natalie Walker wasn't just a decorated officer. She'd spent the last 7 years as a strategic operations advisor for Naval Special Warfare Command. She trained Tier 1 units on asymmetric warfare, civilian threat mitigation, and political fallout management. If anyone knew how to counter a smear campaign, it was her. She opened a blank document, titled it simply, Maplestone Threat Matrix. I watched her build a dossier in real time. Names, faces, emails, timelines, every citation we'd ever received, every visit from security, every instance of surveillance. Each one cross-referenced with date, time, weather, security camera footage, and HOA meeting logs we'd pulled from archived websites. She didn't just compile a defense. She compiled a narrative with precision, logic, and absolute clarity. I called 2 friends from law school, one a constitutional litigator, the other a media defamation expert. I sent them the footage, the statement, and the HOA's threat. They both responded within an hour. One said, "They've just handed you the keys to a lawsuit." The other said, "Don't just win, make it public." Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. The HOA board released a second statement by morning, now calling us a high-risk domestic profile. They cited unauthorized surveillance, aggressive correspondence, and a failure to comply with peaceful resolution protocols. They were baiting us, trying to force a counter-response they could label as another aggression. But Natalie knew better. She never responded in anger. She responded in strategy. "Let them scream," she said. "It makes them louder when they fall." She activated contacts I didn't even know she had. Within hours, she had a forensic tech she'd trained in Virginia combing through the digital metadata of Karen's statements. He confirmed what she suspected. Karen's email accounts had been accessed using an unsecured Wi-Fi network, one registered to a shell LLC tied to one of the fake security contractors we'd had arrested. That was our first real threat. I took it to the attorney, who was already drafting a formal response, not just denying their claims, but demanding all internal communications regarding relocation protocols, private contractors, and surveillance authorization. Legally, it was a discovery request. Strategically, it was a message. We're not residents anymore. We're the enemy you picked, and now we're in your walls. Karen didn't reply. She escalated. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, sent out bulletins, and banned us from attending. Claimed we were under review for hostile conduct. Natalie intercepted the communication from a sympathetic board member, one who'd always seemed uncomfortable with the president's tactics. The agenda item? A vote to begin foreclosure proceedings. It was absurd. We weren't behind on payments. We'd never violated a single actual law. But in HOA language, it didn't matter. If they could convince enough residents we were a threat, they could push it through by majority vote. "They think the neighborhood will back them," Natalie said, typing rapidly. "Then let's show them what the neighborhood actually knows." She published a redacted version of the threat matrix to a private website. Anonymous, secure, but viewable by any resident who had ever wondered why they were getting fined for cracked patio tiles or flagged for Christmas lights staying up too long. Within hours, the site had over 150 unique visits, all from our zip code. The next morning, a man we didn't know knocked on our door. Middle-aged, business casual. He looked tired, worn down. He said, "They fined my wife when she had chemo for not mowing the lawn." Natalie invited him in. Over the next 3 days, more residents came forward. A woman whose autistic son had been targeted for excessive outdoor noise. A veteran who'd been fined for flying his service flag a week too long after Veterans Day. A couple who'd been cited for garage door color mismatch during a remodel. They all had one thing in common. They'd been silent. Until now. "They just made the wrong example out of the wrong house," the man said. "And now you've opened the door we didn't know how to knock on." Natalie documented every story. The table became a file station. A witness archive. A movement. She didn't seek revenge. She sought exposure. She sent an encrypted file to the county commissioner, another to the state attorney general's office. She didn't request anything. She simply included a line, This is not an isolated incident. It's a pattern of abuse wrapped in procedure. We didn't speak to the news. Not yet. But they started calling. Local journalists had caught wind of the arrests, the conflicting stories, and the sudden online leak exposing HOA overreach. We said nothing. We let the pressure build. Let Karen keep talking, keep spinning. The more she tried to control the story, the more threads she pulled loose. On day 6, a legal courier delivered a second cease and desist, this time citing unlawful surveillance and distribution of classified personal data. It was bluff, but now it was also obstruction. Natalie smiled finally. They just fired blind into a room full of mirrors, she said. Now they don't know what's real. That night, I watched her sit on the porch with our daughters, the same as every night. Calm, centered, but sharper now, honed. She wasn't just a mom sipping tea. She was a strategist watching a battlefield unfold. She turned to me once, her voice steady, low. They think we're fighting for our house. I nodded. Aren't we? She shook her head. We're fighting for every house. The war wasn't just ours anymore. It had become a reckoning, and Karen didn't even realize her empire was already burning. The summons came wrapped in weight, thick stock paper, embossed seal, federal letterhead. Karen Reynolds had spent months weaponizing policy. Now we were weaponizing law. Our suit wasn't filed in the sleepy local civil court where HOA squabbles typically go to die. No, Natalie routed it straight to the U.S. District Court, Eastern Division, with a 72-page complaint backed by security footage, state-licensed forensic audit reports, sworn affidavits from no fewer than 12 residents, and her own military dossier that sent up red flags in every bureaucratic office it crossed. We named names. We cited statutes. We didn't allege misconduct. We diagrammed it like a battlefield op. Karen had built her kingdom on 3 pillars: fear, confusion, and silence. We dismantled all 3. Fear, we neutralized with community. Confusion, with documentation. Silence, we buried beneath legal thunder. The official complaint accused the Maplestone Meadows HOA of civil rights violations, unlawful surveillance, weapons code violations, and coordinated fraud. But the real payload was buried deeper, in the discovery packet we delivered to the court clerk's office. 2 terabytes of internal emails, flagged invoices, cross-referenced bank transfers, and digital correspondence showing Karen had been pushing out difficult homeowners under the guise of aesthetic non-compliance, only to flip their properties through a real estate LLC registered in her sister's name. Each case followed the same pattern: citation overload, fear tactics, forced legal action, lowball purchase offer, followed by a relisting and markup. She'd done it 9 times. Our home was supposed to be the 10th. She had no idea we were the wrong family to try and bulldoze. The first court date wasn't a proceeding. It was a detonation. Karen strolled in wearing a cream blazer and smugness so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Her lawyer, a corporate bulldog with slicked back hair and an overpriced tan, smirked at us like we were DIY plaintiffs with a grudge. Then our lead counsel stood up. Federal attorney, retired JAG, and former student of Natalie's from her war college days. He greeted the judge with a familiarity that made Karen's lawyer visibly twitch. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm, slow, and deliberate. "We're not here today because of a petty dispute over mulch or fence heights. We're here because a private organization operating under the guise of residential governance executed a militarized intimidation campaign against lawful homeowners, complete with weapons, unauthorized surveillance, and financial racketeering. We're here because that private organization has become a front for organized abuse and real estate fraud, and my clients, one of whom holds a top-level military security clearance, and the other, a government procurement analyst, decided not to get pushed out like the others." Karen's lawyer stood to object, but the judge waved him off. Let him finish. The room was silent, except for the sound of evidence being stacked, metaphorically and literally. Every binder, every flash drive, every time-stamped video played on screen for the court and the press seated in the gallery. The footage of 2 men drawing guns on a mother and her children in their own front yard hit like a gut punch. The judge's face didn't move, but his knuckles whitened where they gripped the edge of the bench, and then came the emails. Internal messages between Karen and her compliance team, laughing about residents who'd break after 3 more fines, about how old folks don't fight if you scare them with fake legalese, about how the Navy wife might be harder to push, so we'll need more pressure. One even joked about saving a corner lot for my nephew once the widow cracks. The gallery erupted. The judge banged the gavel. Quiet. But it was too late. Karen knew. The game was over. By the end of that day, the court issued a temporary injunction freezing all HOA activities pending investigation. The sheriff's department posted 2 deputies at the community office. The HOA bank accounts were sealed under federal order, but the hammer didn't stop falling. A week later, the Department of Justice issued its own summons. Weapons code violations tied to unlicensed security officers impersonating law enforcement. Financial records tracing laundering through shell real estate firms connected to Karen's husband, her sister, and 2 of her board members. Charges: racketeering, wire fraud, falsification of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. And then came the moment none of us saw coming, but all of us wanted. The arrest. Karen was in the middle of a hastily called emergency HOA restoration meeting when the marshals arrived. They didn't knock. They walked straight through the double-glass doors of the clubhouse conference room, badges out, handcuffs gleaming. She stood up as if to object, but one agent said, "Karen Reynolds, you are under arrest pursuant to a federal indictment. Please place your hands behind your back." Her eyes found ours across the room. Not defiant, not even angry, just stunned. She'd spent so long playing God in a cul-de-sac that she'd forgotten real consequences live beyond the garden walls. The news ran with it. Local first, then national. HOA president arrested in federal fraud scandal. Suburban tyrant faces racketeering charges. Veteran family exposes weaponized HOA abuse. Residents who'd been too afraid to speak out before suddenly found their voices. A retired schoolteacher stood in front of reporters and said, "She made me feel like I was crazy for wanting to grow roses. I thought I was the problem. But now I know I wasn't alone." Another neighbor choked back tears on camera saying, "I've lived here 30 years. This is the first time I feel safe." And just like that, the tide turned. The Maplestone Meadows HOA was disbanded by court order, its charter dissolved, its bylaws nullified, its officers stripped of authority. A third-party property manager took over to stabilize basic maintenance, but the power, that power, was gone. Natalie didn't celebrate in public. That wasn't her way. She watched the press conferences in silence, eyes scanning like she was still studying enemy intel. But the morning after the final court ruling came through, voiding the last HOA claim against us, we walked our daughters to the bus stop for the first time without checking the driveway for suspicious cars. The air smelled cleaner. Or maybe it was just free. A month later, Natalie started offering weekend self-defense classes for local women. Nothing flashy, just confidence, strength, readiness. At first, it was just 5 moms from the cul-de-sac. By the 3rd Saturday, there were 23 women, 2 grandmothers, and a teenage girl with purple hair who told Natalie, "I always thought this neighborhood was fake safe. Now I know what real safe feels like." And me? I sit on the porch now most mornings, sipping coffee, listening to the dull thud of practice pads being struck, watching my wife, my commander, teach real power to people who'd lived too long under fake authority. The HOA office sign? Natalie had it taken down herself. She saved the wooden post, had it cut into coasters. She gave me one. I use it under my mug every morning. A reminder that justice doesn't always arrive in sirens. Sometimes it shows up in the form of a woman with a calm voice and steel in her bones. Karen thought she ran the rules. Natalie rewrote them. And now Maplestone Meadows belongs to the people who actually live in it. Not a board, not a badge. Just families. Free. Exactly what it was supposed to be.